My name is Katherine, and if there's one thing I've learned in the 6 decades of my life, it's that silence often carries more weight than a storm of words. But that afternoon at a funeral of all places, silence was taken from me. I stood at the front, wearing a black dress that draped perfectly along my shoulders. Its fabric soft as water yet strong as steel, custom stitched in Milan by artisans who knew the language of thread better than most know the language of love. That dress wasn't just fabric. It was a statement, quiet, dignified, respectful. And then came her laugh. My daughter-in-law's sharp, cutting laugh that sliced through the hushed air of mourning. "Look at that cheap dress," she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her lips curled in mockery, her eyes dancing with ridicule. Classless, I felt eyes turn toward me, pity in some, confusion in others. She thought she had won that moment, reducing me to an object of derision, a subject of gossip. What she didn't know, what no one except the closest circles knew, was that the dress cost $80,000. What she didn't know was that the very label sewn inside the lining bore the name of the fashion house I had built from scratch. What she didn't know was that the paycheck she depended on came from my signature, from my empire, from the hands she had just bitten. And what she could never have imagined was that her termination letter had been signed 3 days earlier, waiting quietly in a folder on my mahogany desk. I didn't flinch when she mocked me. I didn't glare, didn't shout, didn't stoop to her level. I simply let the silence return, knowing the weight of truth would one day crush her far more brutally than my words ever could. But that moment was not the beginning, it was merely the crest of a wave that had been building for years. If you want to understand how we arrived at that scene, with laughter echoing in a room meant for grief, you must hear the story from the very start: the empire I built, the son I raised, the woman he married, and the betrayal that turned family into strangers. And so, I will tell it all. I was 19 when I stitched my first dress that made a room go quiet. It was in my grandmother's kitchen in Savannah. A tiny room with sunflower linoleum and cabinets that stuck on humid days. I spread muslin over the table where biscuits usually cooled and mapped the lines, the way roadmen map the skeleton of a city. My grandmother, Delilah, ran her singer like a church organ and said a hemline could save a life if it remembered the right curve. She gave me her thimble the week I left for New York, a dented silver cap that held the print of her thumb and the history of every dress she had made for women who wanted to be seen. In New York, I learned that talent was nothing without a spine. I took classes by day and stitched in a back room by night for a bridal boutique that smelled of steam and starch. I learned real silk whispers when you cut it, and crepe de chine sulks before it obeys. I learned that some women cry when they see themselves transformed, and some laugh as if they have gotten away with theft. I learned that a dress, properly made, is not an ornament. It is armor that looks like a sigh. By 27, I had mortgaged my future twice, first to buy a dozen bolts of Italian fabric, and second to rent a storefront in Harlem with cracked tiles and a window that would not fully close. I wrote my name on the glass in gold paint. Catherine Lemaire then stood on the sidewalk and stared at it until dusk, as if the letters might climb down and take my hand. I remember thinking, if you fail, fail with elegance. I met Thomas at a sample sale I could not afford to host. He was tall and quiet, a teacher with musician's hands, buying a dress for his sister. He admired a bias cut I had agonized over for 2 weeks and said, "There's music in this." So sincerely the first nearly laughed. We were married 2 years later in a courtyard with string lights and peonies in vases that didn't match. He learned the names of fabrics like they were rare birds: taffeta, gazar, charmeuse, and he used each one in a sentence as though speaking a foreign language. He planned to master. Our son, Marcus, came in a spring storm. I kept working because work was prayer and sustenance and clarity. I built the brand one seam at a time. I took the subway with garment bags slung across my back like capes, carried my son's milk in a cooler I tucked under cutting tables, and paid every intern because I remembered polishing floors in exchange for praise. At 34, I got a call from a buyer in Milan who had seen a photo of my black silk column dress on a singer at the Apollo. "Come," she said, "bring the dress." Bring your hands. I brought both, and for the first time in my life, someone poured Prosecco into my glass and called me Signora. 15 years later, I owned a glass building in the garment district and a villa outside Como, where 6 elderly seamstresses argued with the vigor of ballerinas about the right way to insert horsehair into a hem. We sold to women who came in with furrowed brows and left with the posture of queens. I made dresses for coronations of the private kind, anniversaries, reconciliations, first days back at work after chemotherapy. If you want to know a woman's life, place your hands at her waist where the fabric meets her breath and feel the story trying to steady itself. Marcus grew handsome the way some men do, slowly, as if he had the good manners to wait for his bones to catch up. He studied business and languages because numbers and words amused him. But what he loved most was people. He could find the talent inside a frown. He came to work at the company after grad school, starting in logistics, then supply chain. He knew how to sit with the women in the sample room and ask genuine questions about their stitches. I thought, he is his father's son and he is mine. He brought her to dinner on a Friday, Alana. She wore a navy sheath and a pearl the size of a tear. She had a smile that started out warm and grew precise as a blade. Alana was in her late 20s and working in PR for a cosmetics startup that called itself disruptive because it could not be honest enough to call itself small. She complimented the duck I'd roasted and the wine I'd chosen and then leaned toward me with confidential charm. "You built an empire, Mrs. Lemaire," she said. "That must feel like flying." I wanted to like her. Truly, I did. I wanted to gather her up the way I'd gathered new bolts of fabric, curious, hopeful. But when she excused herself to the bathroom, I watched her touch the glass door, checking her reflection, the little tightening around her eyes. She wanted something I could not see yet. Ambition is a fragrance with many bottle shapes. They married in September under sycamores that shed papery bark like old truths. I made her gown, silk mikado with a cathedral train that moved like a low tide. She cried in my workroom when she saw herself, and because I am not stone, I cried too. After the wedding, she told Marcus she wanted to come over to the company just for a season to learn. He asked me if we could find a place that would suit her. "Let her try," I said. "No one who learns our house from the inside can leave dumber." We placed her in brand partnerships, where charm is currency and clarity is law. For a while, she did well. She organized a charity gala and got the photographs into 3 magazines. She redesigned a portion of our showroom with a florist's eye. When she and I traveled to Paris for the shows, she sat beside me in meetings and took notes with the fury of a woman who plans to remind history that she was there. I began to think my first judgment had been unkind. The world had judged me harshly, too. And I believe in repentance as strongly as I believe in silk organza. But then came the missteps, small, then larger. She promised dresses to friends of friends who posted selfies with captions about being gifted by the brand. She arranged loaners for parties we did not sanction and declined to retrieve them. When I spoke to her, gently at first, she said, "This is how influence works now, Katherine. We have to feed the machine." I told her machines, when fed too often, eat their owners. We had our first true quarrel over a photo shoot she organized in an abandoned train depot in Queens. She'd left our gowns in garment bags on damp cement and they drank the air like thirsty dogs. When I unzipped them the next morning, the beading had tarnished in spots no I could miss. "We'll retouch," she said, and my temper usually among crows. "You do not retouch reverence," I told her. "You prevent harm or you pay for it." Marcus tried to keep peace not because he was blind but because he believed in people's second drafts. He came to my apartment one night with lilies and a tired smile. "She's young," he said. "She believes she has to make noise to prove she's not small. It will change." I kissed his forehead. "I pray you are right," I told him. Inside, something cold drew its first breath. Thomas fell ill in February. A cardiomyopathy we did not see arriving, a betrayal by his own magnificent heart. I wrapped myself in work because the choice was to drown or stitch. The women in Como sent notes with their stories of men they had loved and lost. I slept on the sofa in Thomas's hospital room with the same blanket we took on picnics. When he closed his eyes for the last time, my cheek was pressed to his palm and a nurse stood behind the curtain, crying softly into her sleeve. Grief, I learned, is not an ocean but a door. You step through it and the world becomes a room you do not know the light switches to. The funeral was planned with a precision Thomas would have admired. He liked music without fuss, a quartet, a hymn his mother sang when laundry snapped on the line. Brass just wants to raise the air. I chose my dress 3 days before the black one from our atelier in Milan. A composition of silk and voile with an internal choristry, so subtle it felt like remembering how to stand. I did not choose it for price. I chose it for minimal beauty. Thomas loved understatement because it freed him to notice the world. On the morning of the service, I arrived early and stood alone in the nave while the flowers tucked white lilies into the marble brackets that held them. The scent was clean as rain. I placed my fingers against the cool of the pew and closed my eyes. When I opened them, Alana was there, perfume forward, cheeks lit with a glow that felt wrong for morning. You look fine, she said, drawing out the word fine like pulled sugar. I thought you might go couture, but that's simple. It is, I said, because the truth didn't owe more. Later, after the eulogies, after Marcus's voice broke and then found itself like a bird stumbling into flight, as people drifted toward the hall for the reception, I felt the prickling that means eyes are on you for a reason you won't like. A circle had formed near the coffee urns. Laughter, the staccato kind. I made my way through the small crowd. Alana stood at its center, telling a story as if the day were a cocktail hour designed to showcase her anecdotes. And I told her, some of us don't have to pretend minimalism because we can't afford more, she was saying. But I guess it's dignified. Inexpensive but dignified. Her eyes flicked up and met mine as the laughter tripped over itself and tried to become a cough. She did not stop. It's possible to honor the dead and still have taste, classless, cheap. She said the words with a brightness that wanted audience approval like oxygen. Someone's cup rattled against a saucer. Someone whispered my name the way one whispers a title in the presence of its bearer. I thought of making a scene, of telling the truth so plainly the room would taste iron. I thought of the price of the dress, the label sewn into its seam, my name, in a script my grandmother never lived to see. I thought of the letter in a folder on my desk upstairs at the office, 3 pages, each signed. A redundancy package generous enough to make a future. A notation of cause the legal team had written with phrases soft as pillows but firm as doors. Violation of policy. Misuse of brand assets. Breach of confidentiality. The audit had found a pattern we could not ignore. Siphoned samples. Undisclosed fees for consultations. A contract with a micro-influencer agency where Alana's cousin took a cut in exchange for strategic seating. We had confronted her 3 days before Thomas died. She'd laughed and said everyone did it. We told her not here. She called me old-fashioned. I called me thorough. The letter waited because even Queen's No Mercy's calendar dot in the hall. I placed my hand on the back of a chair, the way I do when I'm about to pin a dart. Alana, I said. Just her name, nothing else. She smiled, tipping her chin, believing herself in control. The room shivered into quiet. You've had a long week, I said. Perhaps you're tired. I'm perfectly fine, she said lightly. We were just talking about clothes. You of all people, clothes, I said, still mild, can be discussed another time. I let my eyes rest on each face the way light rests on surfaces, not lingering, not accusing. Right now we will eat and we will remember Thomas. He loved dry humor and warm bread and the way his son's eyes crinkle when he is happy. He would tell us to sit. Something in my tone did the work my words did not. People sat. The buffet moved forward, a river redirected. I felt my grandmother's thimble cool and small in my clutch. Yes, I still carry it, a relic. A compass. The first time I used it after she died. I pricked my thumb and watched a bead of blood bloom like a ruby. She had said, a little blood means the dress will last. When the reception ended and the last embrace was said, Marcus walked me to the car. He looked older, lines newly written at the corners of his eyes. Mom, he said. I heard what she said. His mouth was tight with shame that wasn't his to carry. I'm sorry, you didn't teach her, I said. She taught herself, he closed his eyes. I don't know what to do, you will do nothing tonight, I told him. You will go home and breathe. Tomorrow we will speak at the office, I touched his cheek. The house we built, we will keep orderly, I did not cry in the car. I watched the city move as if the buildings could console. At home, I hung the dress in its muslin cover and smoothed my hand down the front as one might soothe the back of a loyal animal. I made tea. I opened the folder on my desk with the letter and read it again, line by legal line. And then I picked up my fountain pen, the one Thomas gave me on our 20th anniversary, and wrote the date of delivery in a precise, slanted hand. I slid the letter back into the folder. I turned out the light. The next morning, I arrived at the office before 8. The lobby smelled faintly of lilies because our receptionist, a poet at heart, had placed a vase close to the elevator. The atelier hummed a respectful, softer hum. Grief had visited the workrooms, too. The women who had known Thomas brought pastries wrapped in flannel napkins, and stories wrapped in laughter. I walked through the spaces and touched shoulders, sleeves. The edge of a pattern someone had cut while thinking about their own losses. Work is the faithful child who keeps the house in order while you sit with sorrow. At 9:30. Alana swept in wearing a white suit and sunglasses as though light were a paparazzo. She did not look at me as she crossed the lobby, but her reflection in the glass of the conference room door glanced in my direction and preened. Marcus stood beside my office with his hands in his pockets. A posture I recognized from his childhood, the one he used when guilty of a thing he had not done. Are we doing this now? Alana said brightly when she stepped into my office, as if a meeting was her idea. As if life were a stage on which she had personally chosen the curtain's rise. I have a call with Vogue at 11, we'll be finished by then, I said. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Marcus remained by the window, a witness and a son. Before we begin, she said, smoothing her skirt. I want to apologize for the confusion yesterday. Things were taken out of context. She smiled, a weapon disguised as a fruit. I'm sure you understand. Grief makes everyone so sensitive. Grief, I said, makes us precise. She blinked. She had not expected that answer. She had expected the softness she could climb. I placed the folder on the desk and rotated it so that the tab faced her, the way I would present a newly basted gown. Alana, I said, and as I said her name, I felt the weight of years settle into my voice like stones in a riverbed, creating a steady path. I have something for you to read. Alana's fingers hovered over the folder as though it might burn. She opened it, scanned the first page, then the second, and her painted smile cracked. You can't, she whispered, her voice stripped of all the bravado she wore like perfume. I already did, I said quietly. You'll find the terms generous. Consider it a kindness I extend for Marcus's sake, not yours. Her face tightened, the pearl of her earring trembling as if even it wanted to fall away from her. She turned to Marcus for rescue, but he only stood by the window, his shoulders square, his jaw set. My son had learned, finally, that silence could speak louder than pleading. She gathered the papers, but her hands shook. She left without slamming the door. Even her anger knew better than to leave echoes in my office. When the room settled again, Marcus sat across from me. He looked older still, but steadier. You've carried this long enough, Mom, he said. It's time I help carry it too, and for the first time since Thomas's passing, I let my hand rest over his and allowed myself to believe the house I had built, the empire, the family, the legacy would not fall. Not while I still had stitches left in me. Because in the end, a dress, a life, an empire, it all comes down to the same truth. If you sew it with care, it will endure. And I had sewn mine with every drop of blood, sweat, and silence I possessed. That was the end of Alana's chapter in my story, and the beginning of mine reclaimed.